All right, imagine you and I are sitting next to each other, maybe in the car or on a couch, and I lean over and say this quietly so no one else hears. What if everything you've been told about needing her is backwards? What if the reason so many men feel anxious, replaceable, or off balance in relationships isn't because women are too demanding, but because men are taught to give up their power without realizing it? That sentence alone might make you uncomfortable, and that's exactly the point. Let's be clear right from the start. This isn't about controlling a woman, manipulating emotions, or playing games. That stuff destroys relationships, and men who rely on it usually lose in the long run. This is about understanding power, not as dominance, but as leverage, self-respect, and emotional independence. And here's the controversial truth most men never hear. In a healthy relationship, the person who needs the other less holds more power, not because they care less, but because they stand on their own. Most men are taught that love means sacrifice, chasing, proving, and overgiving. You're told that if you just show enough commitment, loyalty, and effort, you'll be valued. But in real life, neediness doesn't create attraction, it creates pressure. And pressure kills desire. When you build your entire sense of worth around keeping one woman, you silently hand her the steering wheel of your emotional life. That's not romance, that's dependency. Now here's where it flips. When a man has purpose, boundaries, and a full life, when he chooses a woman instead of clinging to her, she doesn't feel controlled. She feels secure. Why? Because she's with a man who isn't afraid to walk away from what doesn't respect him. That's where the phrase, "she needs you more than you need her," actually points. It doesn't mean she's weak. It means she values your presence because it's not guaranteed. This video is about reclaiming that balance. Not by acting cold, not by pretending not to care, but by becoming a man whose life is so solid that a relationship becomes an addition, not a lifeline. When you understand this truth, everything changes. How you show up, how you communicate, and how you're perceived. And most importantly, you stop losing yourself just to keep someone else. 1. Why neediness quietly destroys attraction. Let me ask you something, and don't answer out loud, just think about it. Have you ever felt your chest tighten when she took longer to reply? Or noticed your mood drop when her energy shifted even slightly? Now imagine I'm sitting right next to you and I say this calmly. That feeling right there is not love, it's neediness. And here's the uncomfortable truth most men don't want to hear. Neediness doesn't bring people closer. It quietly pushes them away. Neediness is dangerous because it hides behind good intentions. It looks like caring more. It sounds like commitment. It even feels like loyalty. But underneath it is fear. Fear of losing her, fear of being alone, fear that without her attention, your value drops. Women can sense this, even if you never say a word. And when they feel it, attraction doesn't grow, it contracts. Here's why. Attraction thrives on freedom and choice. The moment a woman feels like she is responsible for your happiness, the dynamic shifts. She's no longer choosing you, she's managing you. And no one feels desire when they feel responsible for someone else's emotional stability. That pressure slowly drains excitement, respect, and polarity from the relationship. Many men think, if I show her how much I need her, she'll feel special. But the opposite usually happens. What she feels is weight. When your world shrinks around her, she becomes your source of validation, peace, and confidence. That's too much power to give anyone. Not because women are bad, but because no human wants to carry another adult's emotional balance. Neediness also changes how you behave. You overtext, you overexplain. You apologize too quickly. You tolerate things you normally wouldn't. You avoid speaking up because you're afraid of rocking the boat. Little by little, you trade authenticity for approval. And here's the brutal part. The more you abandon yourself to keep her, the less she respects you. Respect isn't demanded, it's observed. Now let's clear up a major misunderstanding. Being non-needy does not mean being cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable. That's insecurity in disguise. Real strength is being able to care deeply without clinging. It's being present without being dependent. A grounded man can love fully and still stand firmly on his own 2 feet. When you don't need her, your attention becomes valuable. Your time means something. Your presence feels chosen, not desperate. That's when attraction breathes, because she knows you're with her, not because you'd fall apart without her, but because you want her in your already full life. Think of it this way. Water tastes best when you're not dying of thirst. When you're desperate, you gulp. When you're secure, you sip. Relationships work the same way. Desperation rushes. Security invites. The irony is that the moment a man stops needing a woman to feel whole, he becomes far more attractive. Not because he plays games, but because he has standards, boundaries, and direction. He doesn't ask to be chosen, he allows himself to be chosen. So if you take one thing from this section, let it be this: neediness doesn't prove love, it proves imbalance. And balance is where attraction lives. When you reclaim your emotional independence, you don't lose women, you lose fear, and that changes everything. 2. The real meaning of she needs you more. It's not what you think. Let me stop you right here, because this phrase gets misunderstood all the time. When I say she needs you more than you need her, I'm not talking about control. I'm not talking about ego. And I'm definitely not talking about treating a woman like she's beneath you. So if that's where your mind went, lean in for a second, because the real meaning is far more powerful and far more uncomfortable. Picture me sitting next to you and saying this plainly. The man who can walk away peacefully is the man who is respected. Not feared, not worshipped, respected. And respect is the foundation that attraction stands on. She needs you more doesn't mean she's weak. It means your presence adds value. It means you are not filling a void in her life. You are enhancing an already functioning one. And the reason this matters is simple. People protect what adds value, not what begs for space. Here's where men get it wrong. Many men hear this phrase and think it means they should pull back emotionally, act indifferent, or pretend they don't care. That's not strength. That's avoidance. Real power isn't pretending you don't need anyone. Real power is knowing you could be alone and still be grounded, fulfilled, and confident. When a man truly doesn't need a woman to survive emotionally, something shifts. His words slow down, his reactions soften, his presence becomes calm instead of tense. He stops trying to convince, impress, or over-explain. And that calm, that's felt instantly. A woman doesn't feel like she has to constantly reassure him. She doesn't feel like one wrong move will collapse the relationship. Instead, she feels safe. And safety is not boring, it's magnetic. Now here's the controversial part. Most people won't say out loud. When a woman senses that you need her more than she needs you, she loses freedom. And when freedom disappears, attraction follows. She may still care, she may still stay. But the spark dims because the relationship becomes an obligation instead of a choice. She needs you more really means she chooses you because you are solid, not because you are dependent. You're not clinging to her to feel worthy. You're inviting her into a life that already has structure, direction, and meaning. Think about it this way. A man with no direction says, I need you. A man with direction says, I want you here. One sounds heavy, the other sounds confident. Same woman, same situation, completely different energy. This is why men with purpose naturally hold more power in relationships, not because they're cold, but because they're centered. Their identity isn't built on approval. Their confidence doesn't rise and fall based on someone else's mood. And because of that, their love feels like a gift, not a demand. Here's the quiet truth. Women don't fall in love with how much you need them. They fall in love with how they feel around you. Calm, desired, free, chosen. So when you hear, she needs you more than you need her, translate it correctly. It means you are a man who doesn't abandon himself to keep someone else. You don't threaten to leave, you don't beg to stay, you simply stand where you are and let the relationship meet you there. That's not arrogance, that's balance. And balance is where real power lives. 3. How men accidentally give away their power. Let me say this in a way that feels real, not dramatic, not judgmental, just honest. Most men don't lose power in relationships because they're weak or careless. They lose it because they're trying to do the right thing. And that's what makes this so hard to notice. If you're sitting next to me right now, I'd tell you this quietly. You probably didn't even realize when it started happening. Power isn't usually taken from men in one big moment. It's handed over slowly in small, well-intentioned choices that feel harmless at the time. It starts when your focus begins to shift. Not all at once, but little by little. You check in more than you used to. You adjust your tone. You become more careful with your words. Not because you're fake, but because you don't want to cause tension. You start thinking ahead about how things might be received. That's when awareness turns into self-editing. Then there's the habit of explaining yourself. You want to be understood, you want clarity, you want to make sure nothing is taken the wrong way. So you talk a bit more, you justify a bit more, you fill the silence instead of letting it breathe. Without noticing, you begin negotiating for peace instead of standing in confidence. Another place power slips away is when your boundaries soften. Not because you don't have them, but because enforcing them feels uncomfortable. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You tell yourself you're being flexible, mature, patient, and sometimes you are. But over time, flexibility turns into quiet self-betrayal. You feel it, but you push it down because addressing it feels risky. There's also the emotional side. You start reacting instead of responding. Her mood affects your mood. Her distance creates anxiety. Her approval starts to feel important, even when you'd never say that out loud. You don't feel out of control, but you don't feel centered either. You feel slightly off, like you're always adjusting your balance. None of this makes you weak. It makes you human. But here's the hard truth. When your inner state depends on someone else, your power is already leaking. Not because they're doing something wrong, but because you've tied your stability to something external. Another way men give away power is by over-prioritizing the relationship above everything else. You tell yourself that's what commitment looks like. You tell yourself that sacrifice equals love. But when your world shrinks, the relationship becomes the center instead of a part. And when that happens, you show up with less presence, not more. You also lose power when you stop trusting yourself, when you ignore your instincts, when something feels off but you talk yourself out of it, when you sense a line being crossed but stay quiet to keep things smooth. Each time you do that, you teach yourself that your inner voice matters less. Here's what all of this has in common. It's not about what you do. It's about what you give up. You give up certainty. You give up groundedness. You give up the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you'll be okay no matter what happens. Power doesn't come from control. It comes from self-trust. And the moment you stop trusting yourself to handle discomfort, loss, or uncertainty, you start leaning on someone else to hold you up. So if any of this feels familiar, don't beat yourself up. Awareness is the beginning of strength. The goal isn't to become rigid or distant. The goal is to stop disappearing in small ways that feel invisible, but add up over time. Because the most dangerous way to lose power isn't loudly, it's quietly, while telling yourself everything is fine. 4. Why purpose beats romance. Every time, let me be direct with you for a moment. Not harsh, not dramatic, just honest. A lot of men say they want strong, healthy relationships, but they've quietly built their entire emotional world around romance. And that's a problem. Not because romance is bad, but because when romance replaces purpose, a man slowly loses himself. If I were sitting next to you, I'd say this calmly. No woman wants to be the center of your life if you don't have one. That's not an insult. It's a wake-up call. Purpose is what gives a man weight, direction, stability. It's the thing that grounds you when emotions rise and fall. When you don't have it or when you abandon it for a relationship, you don't become more loving, you become more fragile, and fragility is exhausting for both people. Here's where the criticism comes in. Too many men use relationships as an escape from uncertainty, from boredom, from the uncomfortable question of, what am I actually building? It feels easier to pour energy into someone else than to face your own lack of direction. But that avoidance always shows up later. When your purpose fades, you start showing up differently. You become overly available. You start waiting instead of leading your own life. You react instead of deciding. Your days begin to revolve around how the relationship is going instead of how you are growing. And without realizing it, you ask a woman to give meaning to a life that should already have one. That's too much pressure. Not because she's incapable, but because it's not her job. Romance is meant to complement a man's life, not complete it. When your life is empty or stalled, romance doesn't fix it. It magnifies it. You feel higher highs and lower lows. You feel more attached, more anxious, more sensitive. And that emotional volatility slowly erodes attraction. Now here's the part most men don't want to hear. Passion doesn't come from attention. It comes from direction. A man moving forward is naturally attractive because he's not stuck waiting to be validated. He has somewhere to go, something to work toward, a reason to get up that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. This doesn't mean neglecting your partner. It means showing up as someone who is already alive inside his own life. A man with purpose listens better, leads better, loves better, because he's not asking to be filled. He's sharing what he already has. So here's the advice, and take it seriously. If your relationship is the most exciting thing in your life, that's a warning sign. If losing her feels like losing your entire identity, that's a signal. Not that you love too deeply, but that you've stopped building something of your own. Wake up to that gently, not with shame, but with responsibility. Reinvest in your direction, your growth, your standards, not to impress anyone, but to respect yourself. Because when a man has purpose, romance becomes lighter, healthier, more secure, and ironically, more passionate. Not because he tries harder, but because he stands on something solid. Romance fades when it has to carry the weight of your life. Purpose never does. 5. How healthy detachment creates stronger bonds. Let me say something that sounds almost wrong at first, but stay with me. The strongest relationships aren't built on holding tighter. They're built on not needing to. And if I were sitting next to you right now, I'd tell you this calmly. Healthy detachment is not a lack of love. It's proof of emotional strength. Most men hear the word detachment and think it means pulling away, caring less, or acting distant. That's not what this is. That's avoidance. Healthy detachment is the ability to stay connected without losing yourself. It's knowing where you end and where the relationship begins. When a man lacks detachment, he becomes emotionally fused with the relationship. Every shift feels personal, every change feels threatening. His peace rises and falls with someone else's emotions. That kind of closeness might look intense, but it isn't stable. It's fragile. Healthy detachment changes that dynamic completely. It allows you to stay calm when things feel uncertain. It allows you to listen instead of react. It allows you to respond with clarity instead of fear. And that calm presence does more for a relationship than constant reassurance ever could. Here's the truth men don't hear often enough. Emotional independence makes you easier to be with, not colder, clearer. A woman doesn't feel like she has to tiptoe around your feelings. She doesn't feel responsible for keeping you grounded. She feels free to be herself without managing your emotional state. That freedom creates trust, and trust is what allows closeness to grow naturally instead of being forced. Detachment also protects respect. When you're not afraid of losing someone, you're less likely to compromise your values. You speak honestly, you hold your boundaries, you don't overextend yourself just to keep things smooth. And over time, that consistency builds reliability, which is far more attractive than constant availability. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without gripping. You show affection without expectation. You give attention without needing something back immediately. That energy feels secure, not transactional. Another important part of healthy detachment is accepting uncertainty. No relationship comes with guarantees. Trying to lock one down emotionally only creates tension. A grounded man understands that connection is a choice made daily, not something owned or controlled. And because he understands that, he doesn't panic when things feel imperfect. Here's the quiet benefit most men don't realize. Detachment makes you more present. When you're not worried about outcomes, you enjoy moments as they are. Conversations feel lighter. Laughter feels real. Connection feels natural instead of forced. So if there's one thing to take from this final section, let it be this. Closeness doesn't come from clinging. It comes from confidence. And confidence grows when you trust yourself enough to stand alone, even while choosing to stand with someone. Healthy detachment isn't about losing connection. It's about removing fear from it. And when fear leaves, what remains is something much stronger. Respect, attraction, and a bond that's chosen, not needed. I'm going to end this with a statement that might bother you. But if it does, that's a sign you should sit with it, not run from it. Most men don't lose women because they're not good enough. They lose women because they forget who they were trying to be before the relationship became their identity. That's controversial because it removes blame. It doesn't point fingers at women, and it doesn't let men hide behind excuses. It puts responsibility exactly where growth begins, on awareness. Here's the truth that rarely gets said clearly. Love doesn't collapse because you cared too much. It collapses because you stopped standing on your own. When a relationship becomes the source of your confidence, direction, and emotional balance, it quietly turns into a burden, even if no one ever says it out loud. None of this makes you broken. It makes you human. Most men were never taught how to balance connection and self-respect at the same time. You were taught to choose one or the other, but the men who keep both are the ones who experience relationships that feel calm, chosen, and powerful instead of stressful and uncertain. If any part of this video hit close to home, that's not something to ignore. That's your awareness waking up. And awareness is always the first step toward change. I want you to do something simple but important. Comment below with your experience, where you felt yourself losing balance, or where you've already started to reclaim it. You're not the only one dealing with this, even if it feels that way sometimes. I read the comments and I do reach out. This isn't just content, it's a conversation. If you take one thing with you, let it be this. A strong relationship doesn't come from needing someone to stay. It comes from becoming someone worth choosing, starting with how you choose yourself. That's the truth. Whether it's comfortable or not is up to you.